Despite the considerable expanse that lay between the illustrious civilizations of Hellas and China, it was not merely commonalities that they discovered within each other, but they also found themselves entangled in the throes of martial confrontations. As the curtain fell on the 2nd century before Christ, the expansive realm of the Chinese Han Dynasty was actively extending its reach towards the northwestern territories. Prior to the deployment of his legions to annex new provinces, Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty customarily dispatched clandestine observers along the prospective paths of these impending military campaigns. These covert agents were tasked with ascertaining whether the lands in question harbored any resources or strategic advantages worthy of conquest. It was during one such reconnaissance mission that an imperial spy brought word to Emperor Wu that beyond the arid expanse of the Gobi Desert lay the affluent state of Daiwan, a region that beckoned enticingly to the imperial ambitions of Chinese expansion. Subsequent revelations would clarify that the nomenclature Daiwan had been employed by the imperial emissary to denote the Greco-Bactrian Kingdom, a realm more commonly and succinctly known as Bactria. This dominion was situated across the contemporary lands of Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and the northern reaches of Afghanistan. It was a fragmentary offshoot of the once mighty Seleucid Empire, the progeny of Alexander the Great's vast territorial acquisitions. The illustrious Macedonian conqueror had ventured to these locales shortly before his untimely demise. Following the disintegration of his empire, a multitude of Hellenes and their progeny remained entrenched in the heart of Central Asia. Over the course of 2 centuries, these Greek descendants had amalgamated with the indigenous populations. Yet the influence of Hellenic culture, emanating from the ancestral lands of Hellas, continued to be a dominant force. The religious practices predominant among the Bactrians were a syncretism of Western and Eastern elements, giving rise to a faith known as Greco-Buddhism. During the epoch under discussion, Bactria stood as the most easterly bastion of ancient civilization. The tales of Daiwan's wealth and splendor piqued the curiosity of Emperor Wu, and around the year 130 before Christ, he decreed that emissaries be dispatched to Daiwan with the intent of forging diplomatic ties with this affluent nation. Several years later, a reciprocal delegation from Bactria arrived in China, yet the Bactrian representatives at the imperial court were met with confusion. They perceived their homeland to be at such a remove from the Chinese domain that they felt beyond the reach of fear, and consequently, they dismissed the need to adhere to the intricate and subservient rituals of courtly ceremony, which included prostrating themselves on their abdomens at the sovereign's feet. Typically, such insolence from ambassadors would result in their decapitation, but the Bactrian salvation lay in the gifts they presented. Their kingdom was renowned for the breeding of magnificent equines, which were lauded in China as heavenly horses. Emperor Wu was so enchanted by these stallions that he overlooked the diplomat's discourtesy. The emperor mandated the establishment of mutually advantageous commercial partnerships with Daiwan. The route to Daiwan, fraught with deserts and saline wastelands, was so arduous, perilous, and lengthy that the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs hesitated to dispatch seasoned diplomats to the west, opting instead to send those who were more expendable. Consequently, representatives from noble yet impoverished lineages, lacking the requisite diplomatic acumen, journeyed to Bactria. They managed to arrive at their destination, but there they conducted themselves with a lack of civility, failing to extend the customary respect to their hosts. It remains unclear whether this was a retort to the earlier discourtesy displayed by the Bactrian ambassadors or a manifestation of the Chinese envoys' inherent haughtiness. Regardless, the distant empire's repute suffered a diminution in the estimation of the Greeks, although a trade accord was ultimately ratified. For 2 decades, the Bactrians accrued substantial profits through commerce with China, yet Emperor Wu's satisfaction with this arrangement was tepid at best. He harbored a desire to possess as many of the heavenly horses as feasible, but the Greeks were exceedingly reluctant and exorbitant in their sales. Thus, the emperor dispatched a specialized trade delegation to the west, bearing with them 1,000 coins of gold and an exquisite miniature equine sculpture wrought from the purest gold. In exchange for these treasures, the Chinese merchants sought to negotiate the acquisition of entire herds of Bactrian horses to fulfill the needs of the emperor and his military. The Greeks, however, rebuffed the offer, deeming the transaction grossly unfavorable. In the face of this rejection, the Chinese resorted to threatening an incursion by the vast legions of the Celestial Empire. The Greeks remained undaunted, confident in the thousands of kilometers of deserts that insulated them from China. Realizing that their overtures were definitively spurned, the Chinese envoys, in a fit of rage, shattered the Golden Horse. The Bactrians, appalled by such a flagrant breach of diplomatic decorum, executed the insolent delegates. Consequently, trade relations with China were abruptly severed. When tidings of this egregious incident reached the imperial capital, Emperor Wu was incensed and commanded the mobilization of a punitive military force to be dispatched against Daiyuan. He entrusted the operation to General Li, the sibling of his favored concubine. In the autumn of the year 104 before Christ, an army comprising 20,000 infantrymen and 6,000 cavalry embarked on a westward march across the sandy and saline expanses. This military endeavor would be chronicled in the annals of history as the War of the Heavenly Horses. The expeditionary force carried with them only the most meager provisions for their journey. The denizens of the oases they encountered en route were disinclined to provision the invaders, necessitating the forcible appropriation of sustenance, which resulted in the loss of both men and time. Soldiers succumbed to the ravages of heat, starvation, and disease along the way. Only those of the most indomitable constitution reached Bactria, and even among these, the majority perished in the assault on the border fortress. General Li returned to China in ignominy, leading only the pitiable remnants of his once formidable army. Emperor Wu's sorrow was less for the decimation of his forces and more for the humiliation that would be the subject of mockery by neighboring states. He decreed the assembly of a new army, once again under the command of General Li, who was now acquainted with the route. A significant contingent of this new 60,000-strong force consisted of conscripts from the prison population. It came as little surprise that as the army commenced its westward march in the autumn of the year 102 before Christ, a majority of these conscripted soldiers deserted. Merely half of the original force that departed from China succeeded in reaching Bactria. A force of 30,000 soldiers sufficed for General Li to quell the resistance of Bactria's frontier fortifications and to lay siege to the grand city of Alexandria Escata, nestled within the Fergana Valley. The local aristocracy had little appetite for protracted defense. A conspiracy swiftly coalesced against the prince who was orchestrating the resistance. In due course, General Li received a package from the besieged Alexandria, a severed head of the prince and an epistle. The missive presented two alternatives: either to terminate the siege in exchange for all the horses in the vicinity, or to persist with the siege, which would prompt the immediate extermination of all the heavenly steeds. General Li elected the former option. For lifting the siege, he was rewarded with 3,000 horses, a cache of provisions for the return journey, and an assurance that a pro-Chinese dignitary would assume governance over Alexandria. The homeward trek was fraught with challenges comparable to those encountered during the campaign to Bactria. A mere 10,000 soldiers lived to see their homeland once more. They returned bearing 1,000 heavenly horses. The remainder had perished en route. In China, General Li portrayed the 40-day siege of Alexandria as a resounding triumph over Bactria. Emperor Wu was exceedingly gratified. General Li was bestowed with a lofty courtly title, and all his surviving troops were lavished with precious imperial gifts. The Celestial Empire henceforth abstained from meddling in the affairs of the remote Bactria. Within 2 years, the Greco-Bactrian Kingdom began to disintegrate under the pressure of nomadic incursions. The emperor's interest in the fate of a former trading ally had waned. By this juncture, Chinese breeders had achieved notable success in augmenting the population of the celestial horses that were so cherished by Emperor Wu. That, my fellow history buffs, concludes today's journey into the past. If you enjoyed diving into the depths of history with us, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating stories from the past. Your support fuels our passion for uncovering the mysteries of bygone eras. Until next time, keep exploring, learning, and bringing history to life. Thanks for watching,